Welcome to Horrible Fates, where the most unexpected and tragic endings to seemingly ordinary lives are examined. We will take some time to explore the darkness that can lurk just beneath the surface of everyday existence. Welcome to The Cellar. This first story is a mysterious one that is still considered unsolved to this very day. Before we dive in, I want to thank Christopher Gerard for sending me this and a handful of other stories to cover. If anyone listening or watching would like to share a story with me, please do so using the email linked in the description box of every one of my videos. Christopher Gerard Powell was born in 1984 to parents Debbie and Jerry Powell. Chris would grow up in a large family, having 4 brothers, Michael, Daniel, Jeremy, and Andrew. The family were all very close growing up in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. Now, there's not a ton known about Christopher's youth. We know that he went to high school at the J.S. Woodworth Secondary School, which was a high school in the Borden Farm neighborhood of Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. After graduating, Christopher would go on to attend Carleton University. Carleton is an English-language public research university located in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. Christopher was big into sports throughout his entire life, but his truest love was ultimate frisbee. Christopher absolutely loved everything there is to the game of ultimate frisbee. At Carleton University, he continued this passion, representing and playing for the university's team. That now takes us to October 15th of 2005. Christopher and his teammates traveled to Montreal to play in the Canadian University Ultimate Frisbee Championship. Now, Montreal is located around 200 kilometers or 124 miles east of Carleton University. After making the trip there, the boys settled in, and on the night of October 15th, Christopher and his teammates would head out to take in some of the nightlife in the area. That evening, the group of friends would hit Club Le Boom, which is located at 1254 Stanley Street in Montreal. From my research, I didn't find a lot of positive reviews about this club or the area. Now, take that as you will, it's 2025 now, and Christopher went there back in 2005. Over the course of 20 years, a lot can certainly change. After enjoying a night out drinking, Christopher would leave Club Le Boom at around 1 a.m. in the morning. From there, not a lot else is known in Christopher's case. For the sake of sharing his story, we are going to go over what could have happened based on the 2 most likely of scenarios. Scenario 1, Christopher would leave the bar at 1 a.m. and begin walking in the direction of where he and his teammates were staying. At some point during his walk, Christopher would end up inside a parking garage. Now, what was he doing in there? I can't be certain. There's little to no information given by the police. But I did see one report that Christopher may have been looking for a discreet place to relieve his very full bladder. Whatever the case was, Christopher was presumed to be intoxicated to some degree. He would soon end up in the direction of an elevator that was no longer in use. Whether it was his impaired state or simply just a tragic accident, Christopher would fall into the open elevator shaft. Within a few moments, his body would crash to the ground below. It's not known if Christopher died instantly or if it was prolonged. But the following morning, a parking garage attendant would make the grisly discovery. Police and EMS were called to the scene, but sadly, Chris had already passed on. Following Christopher's death, police initially stated that they didn't believe foul play was involved, but around a month after his death, the police seemed to change their mind on this. Police would speak to the press and state that indeed, there was some suspicion in regards to his death. Investigators in Montreal would ask the public for help, hoping to hear from anyone who saw Christopher Powell that night. Now, based on the cops' investigation, I believe scenario number 2 goes a bit differently. We don't know anything for certain, but if there was foul play, then we have to presume that someone else came upon Christopher that night. Was it someone he knew? Was it a friend? Or a complete stranger? Did they force him into the parking garage? Were they looking to rob him? In the end, Christopher's cause of death was determined to be from the fall, so he either fell in because of a tragic accident or he fell in because someone pushed, threw, or forced him to jump down that escalator shaft. This October will be 20 years since the death of Christopher Powell. In sharing his story, I hope to bring some more awareness to his case, as there's not much out there about him. If you or anyone you know has any information about the death of Christopher Powell, then please reach out to the Montreal Police Department. As always, my deepest condolences go out to all of the friends and family members of Christopher Gerard Powell. This next story involves two men, Steve Wright, a 20-year-old man from Guerneville, California, and Mark Kraynak, a 23-year-old man from Uniontown, Pennsylvania. In 2005, Mark Kraynak was getting ready to go back to Penn State to complete his sophomore year of college, studying business management. In 2003, Mark served in the U.S. Army 82nd Airborne Division in Baghdad, Iraq. During his service, he received a shrapnel wound from an IED. He was awarded a Purple Heart following this incident. While stationed at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, Mark found a connection within the FCF agency out of Atlanta. The FCF agency, otherwise known as the French Connection Française Agency, provides modeling for adult entertainment. The agency has offices in Toronto, Atlanta, and Santa Rosa, California. In my research, I sadly wasn't able to find a lot of information about Steve Wright. What we do know is that he, like Mark, joined up with the FCF agency, which now takes us to August of 2005. Both men traveled to Canada with their employer to perform at Remington's, which is located in Toronto. Mark would perform under the name Nick, and Steve performed under the name Trevor. On August 21, 2005, Mark and Steve spent the day traveling around and seeing Montreal's tourist sites. They did so with Steven Gerard and Derek Manzi. Gerard is the CEO of French Connection Française, the modeling company that the men were working for. Derek Manzi was a fellow friend and male stripper. As the day turned to night, the group went out to party at the Vatican. The Vatican is a club located in downtown Montreal. One thing of note that took place at the Vatican was the large tip that Mark left a waitress of $200. This may not seem important now, but it will be later on in the story. At some point in the night, the men got separated from their employer. They would proceed to call him around 3 a.m. as they got into a cab and instructed the driver to bring them to the Red Light. The Red Light is an after-hours rave club located around 30 minutes away in the city of Laval. At around 3:32 a.m., the men would pull up to the club, but they simply never made it inside. Steven Gerard, the company's CEO, called their cell phones numerous times in the early morning hours, but he could never manage to reach the pair. Gerard was quoted as saying, "They were the most reliable guys, always prompt, always polite, never late for a shoot. It was unsettling that they weren't contacting me." The next day would come and go, then another, and another, and the men were seemingly nowhere to be found. It was as if they had vanished without a trace. The men were eventually reported missing, but it didn't seem like the police were all too invested right off the bat. But on day 10, everything would change, as the police would be forced into truly looking into what had happened. The Laval Quarry was located around 100 or so meters away from the Red Light Club. Inside the quarry, a horrifying discovery was made, as both Steve and Mark's badly damaged and decomposing bodies were found. The discovery, in a lot of ways, forced the police to start really looking into what had happened. Their bodies were recovered and autopsies would be done. In the end, the autopsy showed no signs of foul play. Soon, the police would start canvassing the area where the men were supposed to have been dropped off, and during this, they managed to locate surveillance video. This video would connect the dots in certain aspects of the story. At around 3:32 a.m., the men are dropped off at the Red Light Club. From there, they are seen running on camera in the direction of the quarry. The presumed taxi they had been riding in can then be seen following behind the men. A few moments later, the taxi is then seen coming back into frame as it then proceeds to leave the area. From the evidence, it looks like, for one reason or another, the men began running from the taxi. It was dark, and they eventually came upon the fence surrounding the local quarry. From local reports, this fence had not always been very well maintained, and there's a good chance they slipped through a hole within the fence. As the men made their way through the hole, they continued running through about 20 feet of bushes before the ground before them simply dropped away into absolute darkness. It's at this point both Mark and Steve began falling over 50 feet down into the unforgiving quarry below. The fall would have been catastrophic to their bodies. It's not clear if the fall killed them both instantly or if either survived for a time afterwards. But by day 10, when their bodies were recovered, it was already far too late. But why were they running? Well, police theorized that the pair were attempting to stiff the cab driver out of his roughly $40 fare. In their efforts to get away from the cabbie, they made their way through the fence and plummeted to their death. Simply a tragic accident. Mark's mother, on the other hand, sees things a little differently. She would end up viewing the security camera footage, and according to her, Steve was running for his life. Police would make an effort to find the cab driver involved in the incident, but from what I've seen, the cab driver was never located. Also, the $200 tip was something I pointed out earlier in the story. This tip makes me pause when it comes to paying the taxicab driver. If the men were so easily throwing money around that night, including a $200 tip, then why would they get cheap on their cab driver? Police did find cash in the men's wallets, and it said that they only had enough money to cover either the taxicab fare or entry into the club. But I've also seen it pointed out that the men had credit and debit cards on them. The biggest question in this entire case is what went on in the taxi right before Steve and Mark fled. Was the taxicab coming after them? Was there someone else there that had threatened their lives? Or was this simply a tragic accident over a $40 taxicab fare? Mark's mother would eventually file a lawsuit against both the quarry and the Montreal Police Department. The outcome of said lawsuits doesn't appear to have been made public, but if anyone has any information about this, I would love if you shared in the comment section below. In the end, we don't have all the puzzle pieces, but what I do know is that 2 young lives ended on that fateful night in August of 2005. They ended in a terrifying and horrible instant as both Mark and Steve plunged to their unknowing deaths below. I want to take a moment to send my deepest condolences to both Mark and Steve's family and friends. Jeffrey Zine was a 37-year-old man from Billings. Billings is a city in southern Montana on the Yellowstone River. It is the most populous city in the state of Montana, with a population of around 117,000 residents. Jeffrey was a husband and father of a 2-year-old boy. Jeffrey and his wife worked together running Montana Air Cartage. Montana Air Cartage was founded in 1989. The company is family-owned, operated, and headquartered in Billings, Montana. The company provides pickup and delivery services statewide, as well as into northern Wyoming, southern Idaho, and eastern Washington state. Jeffrey was described by those that he knew and those that worked for him as a good, caring man. He was known to always put others first, and he was a hard worker. On Monday, March 10th, 2025, Jeffrey made his way to the Red Lodge Mountain to do some snowboarding. Red Lodge Mountain is an alpine ski area located in south-central Montana along the eastern front of the Beartooth Mountains and west of the town of Red Lodge. Now, it's unclear if Jeffrey made the trip to the mountain alone or not. What we do know is that he was snowboarding alone on March 10th. The day was seemingly going as planned as Jeffrey hit the slopes and enjoyed some fresh powder. Following a run down the mountain, Jeffrey made his way over to the mountain's triple chairlift. The triple chairlift was built in 1983, and it runs just shy of a mile long, or around 1.6 kilometers. Soon, it was Jeffrey's turn as he approached the lift loading area. He would get into place as the lift came up from behind, plopping himself right into the seat and making his way up the mountain. As the lift continued to climb, strong gusts of wind were tearing through the area. Some gusts were reported as being as strong as 50 miles per hour or 80.4 kilometers an hour. Now, with this case being so new and still under investigation, we don't have all the answers as of yet. But at some point on Jeffrey's trip up the mountain, the lift would encounter a mechanical error. Now, for those of you that have never been skiing or snowboarding, I want to give a little insight into how these chairlifts work. I've done a lot of snowboarding over the years myself, and the way the lifts are designed is they come up from behind, and you basically hop into the seat with your board hooked to one foot, and you're taken up. Now, there is a safety bar that you can then pull down in front of you as you make your way up the mountain. Logic tells you that you should use this bar, but I will be honest with everyone, not everyone does. I remember in my youth snowboarding at Jiminy Peak in Hancock, Massachusetts. Me and my friends would ride the lift, and I always wanted the bar to come down, but my friends hated using it at all. So, for the sake of Jeffrey's story, we do not know for sure whether or not he had the safety bar down, but I have a feeling he did not. As Jeffrey continued heading up, another gust of wind would hit the lift. Between the wind and some sort of a mechanical issue, this gust would cause Jeffrey to lose his balance. He and his snowboard would fall from the chairlift, plummeting an unspecified distance to the unforgiving ground below. Chairlift operators would be notified, and they immediately shut things down. At the same time, emergency personnel stationed at the mountain would make their way to Jeffrey. He was found to still be alive, as he was urgently sent to a hospital in Billings. At the hospital, emergency personnel did all they could for the loving husband and father. Jeffrey would fight for his life for around 24 hours, but sadly, he would end up passing away, just a day after the tragic incident. An investigation would soon be underway to figure out what had happened, and according to the Red Lodge Mountain, the chairlift had been maintained in accordance with safety standards. There's a lot of work that needs to be done in this investigation. With this story being so recent, we just don't have all the answers as of yet. I simply can't imagine how horrifying it must have been for Jeffrey to fall from one of those ski lifts. For me, this was always one of the most terrifying aspects of snowboarding. I had to work really hard over the years to get over my fear of heights. Now, in closing, I just want to end the story now by sending my sincere condolences to all of Jeffrey's family and friends. I also will include a link in the description box below to the GoFundMe that was started for Jeffrey's wife and child, for anyone that would like to contribute. A big thank you to each and every one of you for tuning in to another episode. If you enjoy the content I make here on the channel, then please hit the like and subscribe button. It helps the channel continue to grow, and it's completely free. Also, you can check the description box below and find the link to my merch store and a link to my membership tier for the channel. YouTube ad revenue hasn't been that great lately, and for only $2.99 a month, you can help support my channel further, and you get some cool perks to go along with it. One of those perks is having your name listed here in the end of each of my videos. So thank you to all my Cellar Dweller members. Also, if you'd like to submit any kind of real-life scary story of any kind, please do so using the email linked in the description box below. As always, I do all the research, writing, recording, and editing for the channel myself, so anything that you do to help support the channel is greatly appreciated. And until next time, I will see you all again as we head back into the cellar.